Organized crime didn't only leave bodies behind, it left questions. Money that vanished, men who walked out the door and were never seen again. Murders where everyone knew why it happened, but no one could prove who ordered it. These are the cases where the files stayed open and the answers died with the people who had them. Tonight, we're moving through the mafia's greatest mysteries, the missing money, the missing bodies, and the disappearances that law enforcement never solved. Not legends, real cases, and questions that still don't have answers. Murder, Inc. was not built to leave monuments behind. It was built to erase people. From the early 1930s through the beginning of World War II, the enforcement arm of the National Crime Syndicate killed with speed, repetition, and efficiency. The bosses they served were buried with funerals and headstones. Their victims were meant to vanish. For years, the locations of those bodies were known only to the men who put them there. That silence collapsed when Abe, Kid Twist Reelis, was arrested in 1940 and chose to cooperate. Reelis had been a core member of the Brooklyn-based hit squad, working alongside men like Harry Pittsburgh Phil Strauss, Martin Bugsy Goldstein, and Louis Capone. His testimony, later corroborated in key areas by fellow informant Ali Tannenbaum, exposed not only who Murder, Inc. killed, but how they disposed of the dead. One of the most frequently used dumping grounds was Brooklyn itself. In the 1930s, large sections of the borough were still underdeveloped, filled with marshland, dirt roads, and isolated stretches that offered privacy and time. According to Reles, the areas around Canarsie and the fields and marshes near Ocean Parkway were used repeatedly. Victims were driven out late at night, often wrapped in sacks or blankets, and buried in shallow graves just far enough off the road to avoid detection. One killing Reelis described in detail was that of William Shapiro, one of the Shapiro brothers who were rivals of Murder, Inc. Shapiro was abducted, murdered, and transported to the Canarsie section of Brooklyn, where his body was buried in a sack. The location was chosen for convenience, not permanence. The goal was delay, not dignity. When the killers wanted to ensure a body would never resurface, water was used. Reelis testified that victims were sometimes placed inside barrels, either metal or wood, and treated with substances such as lye or salt. The barrels were then dumped into the ocean or remote bodies of water. The intention was to weigh the body down and accelerate decomposition, preventing identification and discovery. This method was not unique to Murder, Inc., but it was part of their standard toolkit when disappearance mattered more than speed. Not every killing allowed for careful planning. In some cases, bodies were disposed of wherever the crew had immediate access. Garages, warehouses, and empty cellars controlled by syndicate figures became temporary grave sites. These locations were risky, and several were eventually discovered. In 1935, the bodies of Joseph Amberg and Morris Kessler were found inside a Brooklyn garage. Their deaths were directly tied to Murder, Inc. activity and became early warning signs that the organization was leaving evidence behind. Ali Tannenbaum, another member of the group who later cooperated, confirmed aspects of Reles' accounts. His testimony helped validate timelines, participants, and locations. Together, their statements formed a consistent picture of an organization that killed often, reused methods, and relied on familiarity with the city to hide its crimes. The system failed because it depended on secrecy without redundancy. Too many murders, too many people involved, too many bodies that did not stay hidden. Once Reelis began talking, investigators were able to connect disappearances to specific locations, vehicles, and killers. Graves were found, witnesses were pressured, indictments followed. That chain of evidence led directly to Louis Lepke Buchalter, the syndicate boss who controlled Murder, Inc. from above. In 1944, Buchalter was executed at Sing Sing, the only major mafia leader in American history to be put to death after a criminal trial. Murder, Inc. was designed to make people disappear. It failed because bodies have a way of coming back. and so do the men who bury them. In January 1973, Frank Matthews was arrested in New York on federal charges of tax evasion and conspiracy to distribute heroin and cocaine. Matthews was not a street dealer. He was one of the most powerful independent drug traffickers in the United States, operating outside the control of La Cosa Nostra at a scale that drew national attention from law enforcement. If convicted, he was facing a possible sentence of up to 50 years in prison. At his arraignment, a judge set bail at $5 million, the highest bail ever imposed in the United States at that time. Within weeks, that figure was reduced to $325,000. Matthews posted bail and walked out of custody. He returned to his homes, including a recently purchased mansion on Staten Island, and waited for his court date. On July 2, 1973, Frank Matthews was scheduled to appear in a Brooklyn federal courthouse. He never showed up. By the end of the day, it was clear he was gone. Matthews vanished without leaving a message, a paper trail, or a confirmed destination. He left behind his common-law wife, their 3 sons, multiple properties, and a criminal empire that immediately collapsed in his absence. Investigators quickly focused on money. Authorities believed Matthews had access to between $15 and $20 million in cash at the time of his disappearance, all unaccounted for and largely untraceable. Adjusted for inflation, that amount would equal roughly $100 million today. Matthews was last known to be traveling with his girlfriend Cheryl Denise Brown, who also disappeared. She has never been located, and no confirmed sightings of either person have ever been documented. The scale of the escape alarmed federal agencies. The FBI issued a nationwide warrant and offered a $20,000 reward for information leading to Matthews' capture. That reward figure had previously been reserved for figures like John Dillinger, underscoring how seriously authorities viewed the case. Despite extensive surveillance of ports, airports, and known associates, Matthews was never found. The official position of law enforcement has long been that Matthews successfully fled the country. Investigators believed he used his cash and international drug connections to disappear permanently. Matthews had established supply relationships tied to Venezuela through criminal intermediaries, and law enforcement theorized that he may have escaped to the Caribbean, Central America, South America, or Africa. No immigration records, photographs, or financial transactions have ever confirmed his presence anywhere outside the United States. Another theory has persisted for decades, darker and harder to prove. Matthews' rise had put him on a collision course with established organized crime families. He operated independently, refused to pay tribute, and built an organization large enough to threaten traditional power structures. On Staten Island, he purchased a mansion across the street from known mafia figures, a move viewed by some as either reckless or confrontational. He was also involved in a dispute following a failed heroin transaction connected to an associate of the Genovese crime family. According to unverified reports later received by the Drug Enforcement Administration, Matthews may have been lured to the Bahamas under the pretense of a meeting and killed. The alleged motive was to eliminate a potential informant and settle outstanding conflicts. These reports have never been corroborated with physical evidence, witnesses, or recovered remains. No arrest has ever followed, and no official agency has confirmed the account. There is no verifiable proof that Frank Matthews is alive. There is no verifiable proof that he is dead. Despite one of the most extensive manhunts of the era, Matthews left no confirmed trace after July 1973. His disappearance remains one of the most complete vanishing acts in American criminal history. A man facing decades in prison walked away and was never seen again. Rocco Perri built his power quietly and held it longer than most men of his era. Born in Italy and based in Hamilton, Ontario, Perri became one of the most influential figures in Canadian organized crime during the 1920s and early 1930s. His wealth came from bootlegging, moving illegal liquor across the Canada-United States border during Prohibition. By the height of his operation, Perri controlled supply routes, distribution networks, and political protection that made him nearly untouchable. At his side was Bessie Perri, his common-law wife and business partner. Bessie handled finances, logistics, and negotiations. Law enforcement files from the period consistently describe her as the operational brain behind the organization. That balance ended in 1933, when Bessie Perri was found dead in their Hamilton home. Her death was ruled suspicious, and many historians believe she was murdered, though no one was ever charged. With Bessie gone, Perri's organization began to weaken. The timing could not have been worse. Prohibition ended in the United States in December 1933, cutting the heart out of the bootlegging economy. Law enforcement pressure increased on both sides of the border, and Perri's remaining ventures did not generate the same income. Former allies drifted away, rivals circled. By the early 1940s, Perri was no longer the untouchable figure he had once been. He was aging, financially strained, and under constant scrutiny. In 1944, that pressure intensified. Perri was subpoenaed to appear at a coroner's inquest in Niagara Falls, Ontario, related to matters authorities believed could expose criminal connections and past violence. On April 23, 1944, Perri was staying at his sister's home in Hamilton. That morning, he told her he was going out to buy a newspaper and cigarettes. He stepped outside and drove away. He never came back. Later that day, Perri's car was found abandoned a short distance from the house. Inside the vehicle was his hat. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no witnesses. Rocco Perri was never seen again. From the moment he disappeared, speculation followed. The most widely accepted theory is that Perri was murdered. After 2 decades in organized crime, he had accumulated enemies across the bootlegging world and beyond. With his power diminished and his legal troubles mounting, he was vulnerable in a way he had not been before. Investigators have long believed he may have been abducted, killed, and disposed of in a manner designed to ensure his body would never be recovered. Lake Ontario has often been cited as a possible dumping site, though no evidence has ever confirmed this. Another theory, repeated for decades but unsupported by proof, suggests police involvement. According to this rumor, corrupt elements within law enforcement, frustrated by years of failed prosecutions, took matters into their own hands. There is no credible documentation, witness testimony, or physical evidence to support this claim. Canadian authorities have never substantiated it, and it remains speculation. A third possibility is that Perri chose to disappear. With his empire collapsing and an inquest looming, he may have decided that vanishing was his only option. Supporters of this theory point to the abandoned car and the hat left behind as possible staging, meant to suggest violence and divert attention. Perri still had contacts and may have had access to cash. Some believe he fled to Italy or another country and lived out his remaining years under an assumed identity. There is no verifiable evidence that Rocco Perri escaped. There is no body. There is no confirmed sighting. Canadian authorities have never closed the file. Without physical evidence or reliable witnesses, none of the theories can be proven. What remains is a disappearance that marked the quiet end of one of Canada's most powerful bootleggers. Rocco Perri walked out the door in April 1944, and history lost track of him forever. On December 11th, 1978, a group of criminals walked into the Lufthansa cargo terminal at John F. Kennedy International Airport in Queens, New York, and walked out with $5 million in cash, $875,000 in jewelry. At the time, it was the largest cash robbery in American history. What made the crime legendary was not only the scale, but what followed. Almost all of that money vanished, and the people who knew where it went began disappearing with it. At the center of the heist was James "Jimmy the Gent" Burke, a longtime associate of the Lacaze crime family. Burke was not a made man, but he was trusted by higher-ups because he earned and because he kept things quiet. He operated out of Queens and Brooklyn, and he had a reputation for violence that kept people in line. The Lufthansa job was built on inside information from airport employee Louis Werner, who owed Burke money from gambling debts. Burke assembled a crew made up of trusted local criminals, including hijackers, burglars, and a getaway driver named Parnell Stacks Edwards. The plan unraveled almost immediately after it succeeded. Burke had given Edwards one instruction that mattered more than any other: destroy the getaway van. Instead, Edwards parked the van on a residential street and went home. The van was found within hours, still full of evidence and covered in Edwards' fingerprints. The New York City Police Department and the FBI were suddenly swarming the case. Burke understood what that meant. Everyone involved knew too much, and fear makes people talk. Burke also understood something else. The people he had recruited expected to be paid far more than he intended to give them. $5 million changes the math of loyalty. Burke believed that if even one person decided to keep their share or cooperate with law enforcement, the entire operation would collapse. According to later testimony, Burke received approval from his superior, Paul Vario, a capo in the Lucchese family, to handle the problem his way. Stacks Edwards was killed first. He was shot in January 1979, less than a month after the robbery. His murder sent a message to anyone who thought carelessness would be forgiven. Over the next several months, more people connected to the heist were killed. Among them was Martin Krugman, a bookmaker who had helped facilitate the robbery and was pressing Burke for his share. Others simply vanished, their bodies turned up in cars, in vacant lots, and in shallow graves across New York and New Jersey. Estimates vary, but investigators believe between 9 and 12 people were murdered as part of the cleanup. Henry Hill, a Burke associate who later became an FBI informant, testified that Burke believed it was safer and cheaper to eliminate the crew than to divide the money. Hill's statements came from direct involvement, but some details remain disputed, and not every killing can be conclusively tied to Burke in court records. What is clear is that by mid-1979, nearly everyone with first-hand knowledge of the heist was dead. Burke was never charged with the Lufthansa robbery itself. The case remained circumstantial and witnesses were gone. In 1982, he was convicted of murder in a separate case connected to the aftermath, based largely on Hill's testimony. Burke was sentenced to 20 years in prison. He later received an additional sentence for fixing basketball games. He died of cancer in prison in April 1996. With Burke's death, the money went silent. The FBI has spent decades trying to locate the missing cash. No verified recovery of the main haul has ever been made. Some investigators believe large portions of the money were buried shortly after the robbery, possibly under concrete slabs or on properties Burke controlled. Others believe the cash was slowly laundered through mob-owned bars, nightclubs, and restaurants, exchanged over time for legitimate earnings. In 2013, federal agents excavated properties linked to Burke in Queens and New Jersey. Nothing was found. There is no verifiable information that confirms where the bulk of the $5 million ended up. No ledger. No map, no deathbed confession. The people who could have answered the question were killed, imprisoned, or died without talking. The Lufthansa heist did not end the night the money was stolen. It ended in fear, suspicion, and blood. The cash disappeared because the man who controlled it trusted no one enough to share it. That decision kept the secret intact. And nearly half a century later, the money is still gone. On the night of June 20th, 1947, Benjamin Siegel was sitting on a couch inside a rented mansion at 810 Linden Drive in Beverly Hills, California. He was reading the Los Angeles Times. The windows were open to let in the summer air. At approximately 10:45 p.m., gunfire erupted from outside the house. 9 rounds were fired through a window from a .30 caliber military M1 carbine. 2 bullets struck Siegel in the head, one passing through his right eye, killing him instantly. He was 41 years old. Siegel, known publicly as Bugsy, was one of the most recognizable figures in American organized crime. He had risen through the Jewish mob in New York alongside Meyer Lansky before becoming a key figure in the National Crime Syndicate, the loose alliance that linked Italian and Jewish crime groups across the country. By the mid-1940s, Siegel was living in California and overseeing what was supposed to be the syndicate's most ambitious investment, the Flamingo Hotel in Las Vegas. The Beverly Hills Police Department responded quickly, but the shooter was gone. No weapon was recovered, no eyewitnesses were identified. The case remains officially unsolved, and no one has ever been charged with Siegel's murder. From the beginning, investigators focused on business. The Flamingo was supposed to cost around $1 million. By the time it opened in December 1946, it had absorbed more than $6 million, most of it supplied by syndicate figures from New York and Chicago. The opening was a failure. The hotel closed after 2 weeks, hemorrhaging cash and confirming the fears of Siegel's partners that something had gone badly wrong. Whether Siegel had been skimming money, mismanaging the project, or simply losing control remains a matter of debate. But the losses were real and they were significant. The prevailing theory is that Siegel was killed on orders from the syndicate. According to multiple law enforcement sources and later historical research, senior figures believed Siegel had become a liability. Meetings were allegedly held involving mob leadership connected to Lucky Luciano and Frank Costello, though documentation of these meetings is incomplete and based largely on informant testimony. Meyer Lansky, Siegel's longtime friend and business partner, is often named as the person who gave final approval. There is no direct evidence tying Lansky to the order, and he denied involvement until his death. Permission to carry out the killing in Los Angeles would have required approval from Jack Dragna, the head of the local Italian-American crime family. That approval is widely assumed but not documented. Possible shooters named over the years include John Frankie Carbo and an associate known as Frankie Carranza, both linked to syndicate enforcement work, though neither was ever charged, and no physical evidence connects them to the scene. What has kept suspicion focused on a coordinated mob decision is what happened next. Within minutes of Siegel's death, Siegel's partners Mo Sedway and Gus Greenbaum arrived at the Flamingo in Las Vegas and informed staff they were taking control of the property. The timing has been cited by historians and investigators as circumstantial evidence that Siegel's death had been planned and synchronized. Decades later, another theory emerged from the Sedway family. Mo Sedway had been Siegel's associate for years and was involved in tracking Flamingo expenses. According to Sedway's son, based on accounts from his mother, Siegel had learned Sedway was keeping detailed financial records and reporting directly to Lansky. The claim is that Siegel intended to kill Sedway to silence him. Fearing this, Sedway allegedly sought and received permission from Lansky to act first. In this version of events, the shooter was Matthew Moose Panzer, a truck driver and crane operator who was having an affair with Sedway's wife, Bea. Panzer was an experienced hunter and allegedly used a .30 caliber carbine. After the shooting, he supposedly dismantled the rifle and disposed of it in the Santa Monica area. These claims have never been corroborated by police records or physical evidence, and they rely entirely on second-hand family testimony given many years after the fact. Another theory points toward Virginia Hill, Siegel's companion at the time of his death. Hill had a volatile relationship with Siegel that included documented incidents of physical abuse. Some researchers have suggested that one of her brothers, sometimes identified as Bob or Chick Hill, killed Siegel in retaliation. One of Hill's brothers was reportedly in the house that evening, though his presence does not place him outside the window where the shots were fired. There is no verified evidence linking any of Hill's family members to the shooting. What can be said with certainty is limited. Siegel was killed by a skilled shooter using a military-style rifle. The motive was almost certainly tied to money and control. The Flamingo survived, eventually became profitable, and remained in the hands of the same interests that had backed Siegel. The identity of the man who pulled the trigger has never been established. The decision to remove Siegel, however, fits the documented pattern of how the syndicate dealt with failed investments and unstable partners. Benjamin Siegel helped build Las Vegas as a mob town. He also learned what happened when the money stopped making sense.